Hello students, welcome to my first video on Indian polity for the civil services examination. Let us start the polity from the British era. During the British era, how the political system in India was functioning? All of you must have heard in the history that British reached India in the form of a private limited company, that is the British East India Company. A private limited company reached India. Obviously, for a private limited company, the basic intention will be commerce, trade, making profit, etc. They found India as a suitable market for doing their business. British East India Company came here and initially they were doing the business only. Later, gradually they started establishing their political dominance over India. And in history, we'll discuss in detail. Initially, they established the Madras Presidency. Then Madras became under the British East India Company and they appointed an administrator for the Madras Presidency. Next, they extended gradually into Bombay. Bombay was under the Portuguese authorities and Portuguese has given Bombay as a dowry to British when the British Prince Charles, he got married with the Portuguese Princess Catherine. Later, you can see that by 1757, earlier also Bengal, they established the trade centers, but by 1757, through Battle of Plassey, by defeating Siraj-ud-Dawla, they established their political dominance over Bengal. Then Bengal also became under the British East India Company. See, all these territories in India are now under a private limited company registered in London, not even under the British government. Then obviously British government will have a intention to interfere in this unlimited power of a private limited company. Imagine an Indian company, for example, Academy of Civil Services. If Academy of Civil Services is moving outside India and doing business there, government will support and government will promote that an Indian company is going global. At the same time, imagine if this company is moving outside India and doing the war with the people or the rulers of that territory and establishing their political dominance over that region. Obviously government of India will interfere because it is sometimes a threat even for the sovereignty of government of India as well. And sovereignty of India as well, like private limited companies establishing another country sometimes equal in the size of India or larger than the size of India. If we are looking into Madras, Bombay and Bengal, close to the geographic area of the United Kingdom, is being administered by a private limited company registered in London, then obviously the British Parliament has to interfere in this matter. As a result of that, the first interference from the British Parliament came up in 1773 through the Regulating Act 1773. What is the meaning of Regulating Act? The Act wants to regulate the powers and administrative dominance of the British East India Company, and this was the first attempt by the British Parliament to interfere in the Indian matters, to regulate the British East India Company in the matter. Then you have to note down the word, and this was a very first attempt by the British government or the British Parliament to regulate British East India Company in India. Then that is why it is known as the Regulating Act 1773. Now we can see one by one what were the major provisions of this act. Now let us see in detail the provisions of Regulating Act 1773. As I told you earlier, the aim of Regulating Act is British government wants to make some regulations on the powers of British East India Company in India. To make the regulation on the British East India Company in India, British Parliament decided that one representative of British government will be there in India. One person can be appointed by British government. His duty is to supervise the overall functions and overall administration of British East India Company in India. And that person was given the title Governor General of Bengal. Then a new office was introduced, and the office was given the title Governor General of Bengal. One person can be appointed by British government as Governor General of Bengal, and he will look after the administration of company in India. That means over the administration of company, powers of company in India, above that one British government representative will be there. Then the first person to be appointed as the Governor General of Bengal was Warren Hastings, and for assisting him a 4-member council was also constituted. Then a Governor General of Bengal and a 4-member council was constituted for looking after the company's administration in India, and the 4 members were, this is not much important for the point of view of examination, still the 4 members were General Sir John Clavering, George Monson, and Richard Barwell and Philip Francis were the 4 members in the council. The first Governor General of Bengal is Warren Hastings. That is an important point in the view of our examination. Another important provision was that, now we discussed that a new office of Governor General of Bengal has been introduced. Earlier, there were some other offices. One is Governor of Bombay and Governor of Madras. Both Governor of Bombay and Governor of Madras are the agents of British East India Company. They are not the representatives of British government. One governor is appointed for Bombay by the company. He will look after, he will control the Bombay, and he was managing the business there, and he was making the political administration of Bombay as well. Another same person was appointed for Madras. Now the point is that this act made a new provision that Governor General of Bengal, who is an agent of British government, he will be superior to Governor of Bombay and Governor of Madras. Then Governor of Bombay and Governor of Madras, who are the British East India Company officers, were made subordinate or inferior to Governor General of Bengal. Regulating Act 1773 again introduced the judiciary in India for first time. Then introduction of judiciary in India dates back into the modern judiciary in India was introduced by Regulating Act 1773. As a part of this act, or the provisions of this act demanded the company to establish a Supreme Court in Calcutta. Then the first Supreme Court of India was established in Calcutta, and the first Supreme Court was established as per the provisions of Regulating Act 1773. Now if the question comes, which Governor General of India or Governor General of Bengal founded or established the first Supreme Court of India? Answer is Warren Hastings, because Warren Hastings was the Governor General of Bengal. He came India in 1773 and he continued in India for 12 years. Up to 1785, Warren Hastings was the Governor General of Bengal. 1785, he was dismissed from the service for the corruption. And major problem of these officers who came to India to control India was also the corruption. Reaching India, they found that there is a huge opportunity to earn the money. Companies already doing all illegal activities in India, and the officers of the British government also became a part of the corruption. Now point is that judiciary, then who is the founder of modern judiciary in India? Warren Hastings is the answer. Who established the Supreme Court in first Supreme Court of India in Calcutta? Again, answer is Warren Hastings. But the person who popularized judiciary in India was the second Governor General of Bengal, Cornwallis. We will discuss that later. Cornwallis was the person who established judiciary in each district of India. District courts, or they were known as Diwani Adalats, were established by Cornwallis later. Now our point is, one Supreme Court was established. In that Supreme Court, one Chief Justice was there and 3 judges were there. Then with a Chief Justice and 3 judges, the first Supreme Court of India was established in Calcutta as per the provisions of Regulating Act 1773 by first Governor General of Bengal, Warren Hastings. All the judges were English judges only, and they were not ready at this time to accept Indians as the judges of the Supreme Court or any other court in India. It came up later. Indians were included in the judiciary later after severe demand from the Indian organizations and Indian political leaders. Next and the most important provision of the Act is the Act banned bribery in India. Bribe was a routine for the company officers. British East India Company officers were extremely corrupt. After Battle of Plassey in 1757, they became dominant in Bengal. Bengal was one of the richest regions in India under the Mughal administration or the administration of the Bengali Nawab, starting from Murshid Quli Khan up to Siraj-ud-Dawla. Then this rich province of India, they made it extremely poor with their corrupt habits. They destroyed the agriculture and they destroyed the trade of Bengal. And Bengal was extremely corrupt. You may have heard of a person, Robert Clive, and one of the most corrupt British East India Company officers. He took corruption from Mir Jafar when he was made Nawab after defeating Siraj-ud-Dawla in Battle of Plassey. After that, when Nawab Mir Jafar stopped giving money, he replaced him with Mir Qasim and started taking money from Mir Qasim. Then corruption and bribery was one of the most important social political issue in India during the British East India Company. This act has brought a ban or brought a prohibition for the corruption. Corruption was prohibited or bribe was prohibited. Then legally bribe became an illegal activity or a prohibited activity in India by Regulating Act 1773. That is, brought a regulation on the free atmosphere in India for the British East India Company officers to take corruption. Now nobody can take the corruption, and legally it became an illegal activity. Corrupt officers can be punished now. Second one was the private trade. The company officers, British East India Company officers were coming to India. British East India Company officers were coming to India basically for working in the company as an employee of the company. But later, what they did, they will open a shop along with the salary from the company. Imagine this is a British East India Company officer's shop. We can take it as a British shop. And second, near to that, there is an Indian shop also. An Indian persons or Indian citizen shop is also the issue was that this British East India Company officer, he is in charge of collecting the tax as well. And company is collecting the tax from the traders. Then these company officers were not collecting the tax from British East India Company officers' private shop or the private trade. At the same time, they were collecting the tax from the Indians. Indians, we have to pay the tax. They don't need to pay the tax. Now imagine, both of them are purchasing a product of 100 rupees from the wholesale market. He also purchased it. Here, the British East India Company officer and the company is not collecting any tax from him and from his shop. Then he can sell it for example, for 110 rupees. He is taking a profit of 10 rupees. At the same time, the same nearby Indian shop, they will collect a 20% tax from him. Then his product cost becomes 120. Even if he makes a profit of 5 rupees only, he has to sell the product for how many rupees? For 125 rupees. Obviously, and he is getting only 5 rupees profit. Here the person is getting 10 rupees profit. Obviously, everybody will purchase from this person only. And we will not see at that time, this is my Indian brother and that is my enemy, British East India Company. Nobody will think about it. And when there is a profit of 15 rupees for a particular product in the two shops nearby, everybody will purchase from the cheapest shop only. People don't know what is the reason why it is low price there, why the price is high here, what profit this person is taking, what profit that person is taking. Nobody will take care of that. Then this is why the Indian traders were systematically destroyed by the British East India Company by permitting company officers from doing private trade in India. The Regulating Act 1773 has brought an end to this problem. Regulating Act 1773 has banned the private trade as well as the corruption was banned by Regulating Act 1773. Then private trade was also banned and the corruption was, bribe was also banned by this act. Till 1773, British East India Company were doing a lot of activities in India, both business as well as the political activities. For example, and they were collecting the tax from Indians. A lot of tax were collected by the company. Before 1773, company was collecting tax from the Indian farmers and Indian traders. They were doing the war in India. They have done the war with Siraj-ud-Dawla and defeated him in the Battle of Plassey. They have done the war with the French. 3 Anglo-French wars were done, and they have again done the war with the Mysore, Tipu Sultan, and 4 Anglo-Mysore wars with Marathas were also they were doing the war. Then a company, private limited company is doing the war in India, and along with that they are doing the trade in India, making a lot of profit. But nobody they have to convince, nobody they have to report that how much war we are doing, how many soldiers we have, how many kings in India we have done the war with them and defeated them, how much trade we have done, what is our profit, and how much tax we have collected. They had no responsibility to report any higher authority except the Court of Directors of British East India Company. Now, British government thought that this much freedom a company, a private limited company cannot be given in a foreign territory. That is why the British government now they introduce by Regulating Act 1773 one more regulation that every year company should send a report to British East India Company should send a report to British government every year on how much tax you collected and how much war you engaged in and how many trade you have done and what is the profit out of these trades. This was the last regulation placed by Regulating Act 1773 on the powers of British East India Company in India. Stay tuned and go to the next video, and we will discuss another act during the British time in the next video.